I wanted to be an artist.
Looking back at the history of art,
I wanted to be an artist.
Hello and welcome everyone to Bark and the Gam podcast here in Bark Berlin Gallery. My name is Irene Sanchez Gomez, and today I have the pleasure to be able to talk with one amazing artist, Carla Marchesi, that is here. And you are the artist for our current exhibition here in Potsdamer Platz in our new space, Cruise Control Death Drive. So, welcome, Carla. How are you? How are you feeling?
Very well. Having just finished this exhibition, I'm about to get on a plane for my next exhibition, so it's been a very productive period.
That's nice. I mean, you're growing, so you stop growing. So, first of all, I want to introduce yourself a little bit. So, I'm gonna make like a little tour of your artistic career. That is a super long one, so I need to read it some. So, you're from Brisbane, from Australia. You studied fine arts and received a large numbers of awards and honorarius, so congrats. I want to, for example, to mention one of them is the Phyllis Bacon Gallery's Prize of Excellence Robin, that which allowed you to study for a semester at the prestigious Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in the United States. That's a long one.
For sure.
Yes. So since then, we can talk about a lot of collective and solo exhibitions around the world, because you have a lot of in Australia, in Sydney, in Brisbane, and Melbourne, and internationally too. You have in Singapore, Luxembourg, and Germany. In 2012, you moved here to Berlin, and you start this adventure to make like a solo and collective exhibition too. And for example, one of your first debut here in Berlin was the one that you have Every Moment Life Together title in 2030 in the Kunststraße. And now we can see your artwork here in our new space in Potsdamer Platz 8 with this amazing exhibition, with this amazing project. So after doing this fast tour in your career, I want to make a little jump to the past before to go to the present and the future, because I want to ask you, when does the painting appear in your life? Do you have the memory for it?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was always creative as a child, and I'm the youngest of 7 kids, and basically kind of carving out your own kind of identity was super important. So I felt like every other profession was taken from every other sibling, but no one had touched the kind of creative field. So, I mean, naturally I was drawn to spending my time just drawing and creating my own worlds, and I took over what was meant to be like this mutual study space for all of the siblings to share, and I very quickly made it my atelier and like with my creative madness. And I remember, like, my sister is 7 years older, so she was going through high school, and she never continued on with arts. But I got all of her kind of leftover art materials that were kind of high school grade, from a quite young age. And I just remember, more so than anything else, it's just mixing color and being really fascinated with like the chemistry of color and the alchemy of color, and we would just like mix up these kind of muddy potions and then end up just painting everything in my periphery just to get rid of it and to use it, on every object, somehow. But there was this real kind of just like learning through just like the material play.
So it started this crazy learning about the colors, these mixes ones.
It's just like that captivation of what holds your energy and what can you get lost in. And I think you kind of recognize from a young age, like, through what activity do you lose time and space with.
And that's what you decided to follow this creative.
I was toying, as a child, because my mother was a wonderful seamstress and was always playing with her fabric scraps. So I was more drawn to the idea of fashion and designing clothes and making clothes with the fabric scraps for my dolls. But it was more so, I think in grade 9 or grade 10 in high school, it really kind of clarified that to singularly pursue visual art, where it was like a pretty perfunctory kind of exercise of like a surrealist I don't know, collage, you know, where you're taking scraps from magazines and collaging it to a surrealist composition and then translating that into a painting. And I just remember, again, that sensation of like losing time and space, and somehow, you know, you've zoned in, 5 hours have passed, and somehow you've made something that's better than you've ever done before, and just that sense of transformation and not knowing how you got there. But yeah, it's magical. No, really, it just that was a really compelling feeling.
I think everyone who is in art needs to born a little bit with this creative goal, because we always have more and more and more on create and mixing and trying new things and all this stuff. And I think this child, Carla,
it's pretty foundational when it's down to it, because like what compels me to continually make, it's the material curiosity first, and that's always my kind of entry point into every next body of work, is like, how can I challenge myself in terms of my material concerns? Can I change my methodologies? Like, and the fascination, what would happen as if a laboratory if I did this, this, and this instead of what I've just done? Like, and chasing some kind of the potential for finding something new in the process of making.
Wow. There's a lot of change of methodology, I guess, no?
Yeah, because I guess you kind of arrive, you go in with a certain set of intentions, and you don't want to hold on like too tightly. So there's this whole kind of myth and story that you tell yourself about, you know, how these like this hypothesis of like this set of conditions, this set of ideas, this set of methods, what you imagine, you know, the outcomes to be. But like as soon as you have the brush in hand, you know, that goes out the window. It becomes its own thing, and that's kind of the point. Is like you are responsive and dancing, you know, kind of with the process, and you're being responsive to the problems that you're making, and you kind of, it's a continual kind of agitation and problem solving, you know, using all the tools that you have, obviously, even materially and formally, to kind of get yourself out of trouble, and just be guided and directed to kind of where the painting wants to take you. And then it's at that point when it no longer agitates you, like then it's done. But of course you can't achieve, like it's so divorced somehow from the original intentions, and there's some kind of myths or dreams or visions that kind of hold on that you couldn't achieve in that body of work, but that becomes an impetus, you know, to start the next. So I always have this like overlap when I'm kind of starting to let go of a body of work as it kind of draws to its conclusion. Like the ideas kind of start flooding in of what I couldn't achieve in this body of work, and like starting to kind of get visions of like the next shows coming through, which again start with a myth that may know, you know, just be a story to start rather than necessarily a tangible kind of outcome.
Yes. So the process is one of the important things that you have into your methodology, because if you, I mean, I understand it because I think this is most of the most funny parts of being an artist. I mean, this try and mistakes and all these things that you're talking about, that maybe the final product is just a thief and you don't want this final product.
You've got no control once it leaves the studio. It's kind of not yours anymore. And this is the space you've really got a foundation to ground yourself, because if you don't kind of love the process of doing it, considering the amount of time that it takes, and like kind of, I mean, especially as a painter, there's an isolation, and like literally every one of these surfaces, they're complex, they take time. I'm standing in front of it, giving it my energy and interacting with it. There's something just, that experience has to be quite sacred in a way. Like, because
I have this question for later, but I think it can fix here. If in this whole process you're telling us that, do you have some rituals, you have some methodology that you need to make, like at each time that you want to make an artwork? Maybe music, or I don't know, dancing in front of the canvas.
I wish it was that.
I wish it was easier.
I'm incredibly dry when it comes down to it. I really dislike having anything too emotional around me. Like if I have music, for example, like I find my head goes into some pretty destructive like thought spirals and patterns. So it's kind of better that I kind of keep myself operating in a more intellectual like headspace. So it's very much kind of political and history podcast, kind of just like constantly like someone talking to me or with me, you know, and it kind of creates almost like a social space, you know, in the studio. Like I'm in this kind of loose conversation. kind of just helps me keep my brain almost switched off enough to be intuitive with my mark and not get too kind of wrapped up in my own kind of psychology.
That's interesting. So focusing on other things, like completely another thing. So maybe just
to tune into your hand in a way, like, and just to let it. Like I was saying, like at the beginning, like that sense of that zoning in and traveling through time and space, to an extent, like you want to kind of get out of your own way as much as possible. But in saying that, like the beginnings and ending of a studio session is kind of bookended the same way, because I always take after every stage of every painting or every day's work, I will document it on my smartphone, and then look with some kind of critical distance, almost like the painting becomes a thumbnail that you can kind of at least assess what is working, what's not working, and do like some really kind of compositional kind of critiquing, and then that becomes your kind of framework to come back into the studio. So you're not starting, sitting in front of the canvas without a plan.
Of course, it's kind of performance too, like recording you at the same time yourself.
It's an incredible archive to have. In reality, I could do stop motion,
and see all the process and see what the fuck.
and like that's actually kind of a really nice idea to take a pause and revisit like works that, because obviously you're making choices at every point of like, this is the direction I'm going to go in, but like at what time, if you do like a bit of a self-reflection, like what time it could have been like interesting to go a different way. Like what would you do now that you've had a decade more experience? Like would you have taken, the
choosing, like all the choices that you can make in the process.
And what was your natural hand telling you there that you couldn't see at that point in time? I think that would be really fascinating to kind of, as my own kind of archival research, to kind of see, and I'm sure it would reveal a lot.
And sometimes maybe these kind of things that you're listening to, like you told about the historical podcast or whatever, and we know that you have like a lot of influence for the 17th century Dutch still life. So it can be maybe connected.
I'm very persuaded by what I'm listening to. Like I remember doing.
It's more random. Like
I mean, it's very much to do with like the ills of our modern time and place, like and a kind of trying to make sense of it in a kind of sociological kind of critique. But it's funny, like in one body of work, when I was first interested and drawn to the impossible bouquet as a motif to kind of symbolically use and stand in for some of my concerns about the nature of contemporary life, I started listening to like some really in-depth, slow, like World War I kind of history podcasts, like 10, 15 hours, and like suddenly the work went from a very kind of a body of work that was kind of critiquing a certain kind of contemporary vanity, and it completely morphed into like this existential dread and like nihilism.
It was like a crisis.
Absolutely. And then I started putting all these kind of abstract disruptions on the space and these black holes, and then it like started to span deep space-time. Anyways, so it can be very influential.
It can be. So maybe you have more crisis for the historical things more than for your own growth. It's like
it's like a counterbalance, like in terms of like the histories repeat themselves, and especially when it comes to kind of different technological revolutions and their propagandic kind of quality, it's really, things repeat themselves in plain sight without the kind of historical perspective,
I think it can be connected, because if you make like this is inspiration from the 17th century Dutch still life, and you like broke with it, like you first in this gender we have like the naturalistic flowers and blah blah, and you suddenly you broke with it and you make these artworks that is posthumanist and hyperrealistic, so it can be connected. So because you want to stop this repetition in historical life or something like that, so you make this kind of
my relationship to the impossible bouquet kind of comes a little bit more laterally than that, because like certainly that what you're describing are my intellectual interests and like things that I was certainly kind of mulling over, but connecting it with this visual language kind of happened some steps before. So like when I as a young female painter, when I was like in art school, I think it was kind of quite natural to be drawn towards kind of autobiography in the tradition of kind of, female kind of self-portraiture. Because especially being young, didn't quite know what I wanted to say. I just knew that I had something, had something to find at least. It was the process of finding my language. I knew I knew how I wanted to paint in a way, but I didn't know what I wanted to say. And there was a bit of a breakthrough kind of in finding my language when I took myself out of the work, and it was the portraiting in the absence of the figure. So being very drawn to domestic interiors and using the objects as kind of, autobiographical kind of stand-ins, for myself. And then that just became kind of refined in a way in terms of looking at the still life and the potential for that to be, again, an autobiographical kind of...
trying to find yourself in other things that is not common.
Or just speak to your time and place with one level remove and allow a bit more kind of space for metaphor and poetry to exist without being so kind of figuratively literal. And in 2015, I came across a photographer, Tamron Simon or Simon, I don't know how to say. I wish I'd actually, because it's obviously just coming up to mind now. I wish I'd looked up the name of the very particular body of work that I was very interested in. But it was a series of photographs where she reconstructed or conceived what bouquets were on the table at particular diplomatic meetings at world history.
Okay.
And it was really beautiful, really modernist, really
Any change in the history, the kind of?
Yeah, just imagining at this UN meeting, what would have been
this kind of flowers or this kind of... Oh, that's super interesting.
And that was really illuminating the idea of the potential for the botanical still life and what could that stand in for in terms of modernity and other moments in history.
Yeah, and maybe this is a kind of focusing a super detail that maybe is disappear for other people, and you can just find a piece of art in something that is a detail, because
it's something of the flowers as a silent witness to moments in history and time. I think that's really fascinating, and that was kind of a way of rethinking the cultural impact of the flowers and nature and the botanical, rather than necessarily just seeing it as just being, these things of beauty. And then, very much made me look into the origins of the Impossible Bouquet and the 17th century Dutch still life. And it just seemed to me this perfect kind of metaphorical potential to kind of stand in for first market capitalisms and how our modern world, kind of evolved and the parallels there.
I never thought about it. You opened my mind now, wow.
Because it's the first time it was the separation. It was the first time a middle class was really booming and in a secular capacity away from the church. And there was middle class wealth, and also the Dutch the tulip trade with the first stock market. So there's a lot of kind of parallels to our individualism and how Western worldviews kind of developed from there.
Whoa!
But it kind of went away from a pure capitalist critique. At a point, it just became a language that I could transfer my own kind of thoughts and critiques and observations about different aspects of contemporary life, and just kind of using that as a vessel.
Wow, so now my mind is blowing, first of all. That's so interesting. Now I don't know how to connect it with this.
It's been a journey.
Yes, I want to talk about the colors, and I think this is a good connection, because this artwork that we can see here in the Cruise Control Drive, you have this monochromatic in each painted, but all of this has this dark side, because if you look into your last artwork, you have different types to use the color. So I just want to ask you, what happened in this series with the color, and how do you make its process to change for the last series? Or
it's really primarily keeping myself entertained in a way, but like I was saying earlier about what you don't achieve in one body of work, you're kind of chasing its either opposite or what you weren't necessarily exploring in that body of work. So to keep it fresh, I've always kind of worked in a way in certain extremes. Like if I've done a body of work, a really large scale work, then I might switch to some like miniatures, afterwards, just to kind of like work in complete contrast. So I was originally, when coming to use the Impossible Bouquet as a stand-in for my thoughts, I was very much holding on to the traditional palettes in my first investigations. Mm-hmm. So the desire path, which you make reference to, was basically this kind of challenge of what is the potential if I completely invert that and have a real kind of cyber contemporary kind of coolness and candy freshness, and like how can that play with quite nihilist and problematic ideas, kind of using color as a foil, as a way of like having like using it as a conceit, as a deception to bring people into the lusciousness and of the color, and yet the longer they spend time with the work, the more kind of maybe the darkness is kind of revealed. That's being kind of camouflaged on first blush. Mm-hmm. And similarly, Cruise Control Death Drive was kind of conceived as a bit of a counter to some of the aesthetic aims that I had in the previous body of work, whereas I wanted to kind of go back to that more liminal space of the dusk, dawn, or the saturated colours and the more liminal transitions of time. But I kind of liked the idea of each painting being a mid-tonal colour story and its own kind of limited palette, which I had the intention to make it even more limited, but then I just realised I really enjoy colour too much. I just kept expanding the palette each time. And like, why am I fighting one of my best attributes is actually complex colour arrangements? Like, why would I want to keep that at bay? So
you feel comfortable with this kind of change of methodology of some colors?
Yes. Yeah.
It's like a game?
Because this is, again, what we're kind of, it's funny how there's so many like circles and parallels to what we first started talking about. Yes. It's again, this that intense curiosity in the alchemy of like, what happens? What can be achieved? And
what happens if I use this one?
Exactly
or
right.
If I change now everything, or if I focus on this color?
And it's magical, like, because like, you can only conceive a hypothesis and then it gets tested and maybe it doesn't work. And it's like, what am I going to use in my repertoire?
You know what happened with this?
And like there are many paintings in this collection where the limited palette that I did the first underpaintings with, well actually the first overpaintings of my underpaintings, but we can talk about the process in more depth at another point. But once I've kind of established the kind of the form and the volumes in this limited colour palette, it potentially wasn't harmonious. It wasn't necessarily working. And if it agitated and annoyed me enough, then it would be a case of like, fuck it, I'm going to completely coat it in a completely different colour, change its tonality, change its emotional kind of resonance, and take it to a whole different landscape. Like, for example, Swamp Life was originally above ground, forest setting, and really wanting to play with these purples and blues and a kind of cool moonlit kind of mysterious kind of shadowy landscape. And it did not work. And then I coated it with this beautiful Schminker neon green geld that just has this like acidity to it. Like it makes everything that it goes over feel nuclear and a bit off and a bit
and suddenly it works, like suddenly everything changed.
It became a story. It went underwater, and now I feel like it's subterranean. It went under a lake, and that created a whole new potential of like what could be growing in this like strange hybridized environment, and what new formations could emerge. And it was a delight to actually have that full transformational pivot moment from intentions to the painting telling me what I want it to be.
That's true. That's a good point to see the artwork. Like, it's not only you as an artist; it's what the artwork is telling you to do.
Exactly.
Like sometimes the artwork tell you to change the color, to change the methodology, to change the way that
or to
you
stop.
do it, or to
I would
stop.
love to be told to stop.
It's so important to know that in the process is making you need to stop sometimes. Maybe you need to follow another way, but you need to stop. That's an important point.
That used to be like the constant feedback from like dear friends of mine, especially like at art school and in my early days of practice. It was just like, they always used to tell me my underpainting was the most interesting and most alive part, and then I would end up just killing it. Killing it with refining everything, too much content, too much details. But yes.
Yeah, that was the other question that I have, like these kind of details that you have, because you make this, you create this ecosystem, because there are an ecosystems, and you can swim on it.
Oh, yes.
You can see a lot of, each time that you see the artwork, because it happened to me, because I saw them too many times. Every time I saw something new. We have this one now, and I just realized that this has evolved.
Oh yeah, no, this is a whole kind of like anti-colonialist story.
But it's so curious how you do these kind of details that you can see each time that you saw the artworks. How is this? What happened here too that you think, okay, I'm gonna, because you're hiding it, so you need to.
Yeah, it's a really purposeful aesthetic conceit. In the way I'm a maximalist, you know, I want there to be like,
Yes,
I want there to be too much of anything, and it's kind of like I was saying earlier with this idea of like, using aesthetics like candy, you know, as this kind of point of attraction. In a way that if you eat too much, you might feel a bit too sick, you know, if you're enveloped in the world for too long. And it kind of functions in two other ways. In a way, you know, I believe paintings need to be seen in the real. There's a poetry that is lost when you're seeing it on Instagram. Yeah, exactly right. So I'm really invested in the experience of a viewer in front of my work, and I want there to be a communication of like the romance, the love, the intimacy that I have in creating the surface, you know, in proximity this far away, you know, from a surface. I want to invite the viewer into that same proximity, and that's a conversation that we can have, you know, through the object. And I find that incredibly tender as a relationship in a way, and to live with the work. Like you want it to, you know, for whoever gets to own the work and is attracted to it, I want that story to unfold over time. I don't want it to be like a graphic one hit. I don't want it to be a single pun, a single joke. I want it to breathe with you. I want it to live with you, and something that you could have on your walls for a lifetime and still find.
And make stories with each time that you
memories
see
with it, and have some different little gems kind of, you know, appear to you and unfold. Like,
gems is a good word to describe it, because you were looking for it and you found it and you find new things and
sometimes there's just like little jokes in there for my own entertainment because I'm spending so much time in front of it making it. So yeah, sometimes it's just complete little like tiny absurd kind of moments. Like,
you have some funny stories about one of these.
I mean, we've got dry rot in our view, and in like the bottom right corner, like there's just this kind of like trail of organic matter and objects, and by chance it's like what could be either bones from like a vertebrae or a shell or human fingers, you know, coming out of the floor.
The ground.
Yeah, like I'm not sure, but I enjoy that. And then why is there a pearl with an oyster next to it, and what is a grape and or olive balancing on a rock? Like there's no particular kind of rhyme or logic to it, and yet sometimes these additions are really significant in terms of like the metaphorical kind of meaning, but sometimes they're just entertaining.
Make like a game, so you can play with the artwork too.
And I want there to be a level of humour in the work as well. Like I really enjoy.
So we are talking about a lot of things about your artwork. You're telling us a lot of things so interesting. I am enjoying a lot, and I have like a few last questions for you. And one of them we are talking about a little bit in the conversation, but I want to ask you about your inspiration. I mean, when you were a young child and you see do you have some inspiration that you need maybe or you feel comfortable checking it, following, or it more depends about the era, the time?
I mean, I certainly believe that you find the artwork you need at every point of your life. You know, if you're looking, the experience of going to a gallery or museum is incredibly intimate, or even if you have like old paintings that you are familiar with, they find you anew because it's important that you're giving something to the work for it to give you something back. So there's of course there's work that holds very deeply in my heart for the personal conversation we've had together. But I guess foundationally, it's funny enough, like I think my sister took me to a museum show in my hometown of Brisbane at the Queensland Art Gallery, and it was a big Dutch still life retrospective. Who would have thought? It was like painting in the Golden Age or something, and I remember being fascinated by obviously like the level of hyperrealism and like the technical kind of competency. But like I don't know like how old I was, like maybe like 10, thereabouts. But I remember seeing like this like traditional still life with like the fruit on the table and the platters, and a particularly textured, unpeeled lemon. And for some reason, like rather than being like intimidated by them, I was like, well, I could paint that, or at least, but like maybe not with that kind of like ego, but like a sense of, oh, one day I will be able to, like with this real kind of self-assurity. It's really funny.
The 10 years, 10 years, Carla, look at this lemon peel, like,
wow, I can do it. I think that's been pretty foundational to me. Like I've not compared my abilities to my peers with any sense of criticism. It's like it's always been a case of like I will learn how to do the next thing, or I will investigate, I will try hard. I've got this like a lifetime kind of commitment to this surety that I'm going to find my practice through practice. So it doesn't matter if the intentions of a particular exhibition or a particular work isn't met, because it's telling me what to do next. And I think there's something very special about that kind of continuum, and you're just like feeding and taking your learnings, as much as you can, just literally by looking. And when I go to a gallery, or museum, I'm completely like entranced by the story of materiality first and foremost. Like I want to investigate the surface like a detective. I love when there are moments when you can see like the holes and gaps back to like the underpainting, and almost kind of X-ray vision with your eyes, the imagination of how it was to construct that painting. And I used to purposely try and make these little moments where I could have that same invitation to a viewer too. And I think I'm going to, come back and explore that in my next body of work, and really exaggerate the particular layers of painting and the kind of abstract potential to isolate the lateral relationship to how a painting is created, rather than just like the image and flat surface. But there's a complete romance when it comes to, again, materials. And then like the rest is obviously, if you're compelled, you spend more time unpacking conceptual conceits and your emotional relationship to it, but it's always materials first.
Of course, yes. And just for finish it, my last question is about, we are talking about the past, we're talking about the present, and I want to ask you about your future.
I mean, my immediate future, as I was like saying, with the last body of work, I already have visions for my next collections.
That's amazing.
And they're in my mind's eye, and they're both distinctly very different, aesthetically and conceptually, and in material processes as well. Like it's more like I want to try everything. I want to do it. I want to paint in whatever way the work leads me to, and see what I can do from that.
So where we can see Carla in the future? We're gonna see you in Australia, because you told us that you have a new exhibition now.
I mean, I am getting on a plane in 2 days to fly to Melbourne with the gallery that I am represented by there, Nicholas Thompson Gallery, and we're going to actually kind of have a bookend to this exhibition. It's like a further continuation. So like the works were made concurrently. In my studio at the same time. So like the ideas are very similar, whereas in this body of work there's more kind of the beginnings of like the dismantling of kind of Western ideals, and this invitation for new knowledges through hybridity and involution and evolution. The works in Melbourne have taken that as established fact in a way, and just continue and invite the organic structures to create new monuments in place of the ones that we've created as man.
I'm excited. I'm excited to see it. I wish I will go. Like I'm excited to see
Send you
that.
photos.
So first of all, congrats for your successful. I'm so happy to meet you, to talk with
Oh, it's
you.
been a pleasure.
And I'm so happy to having your art here in the gallery, in Bar Berlin Gallery. It's been amazing, and I wish you all the best now in Melbourne and all the world. Carla,
Thank you so much. It's such
around
a
the
pleasure.
world. So thank you so much, personality. Thank you for being in the gallery. It's been like a super funny and to explain to people your art, the people who came. And that's, I think, this is the end of our conversation in Bark and the Gang podcast here in Bar Berlin Gallery. So you can see your artwork here till 6th of October. You can see in Melbourne in a few days.
Well, from October 4 to the 21st of October, so there's a slight overlap. If you can, actually, someone who came to my opening is going to be at the other one, so they get this
Oh my
one
gosh.
person that gets to see both.
So you have fans. You have truly fans. So thank you so much and see you soon.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to be an artist.
Looking back at the history of art,
I wanted to be an artist.